economy will shrink in the course of 2023. And then weren't that different compared to many others when it comes to the inflation, because inflation is just...
But restoring price stability when inflation is high can require measures that are not popular in the short term.
For Chrystal, and today is Wednesday, January 18th, 2023. And this is what we're seeing in the press, Swedish press, and perhaps a little help for you in your investment in the market, and what you could look for within the Swedish market. So the Swedish press, we had another explosive night. This time it was in the north side of town in Stockholm. So the previous night we had one on the south side of town, and that was considered to be part of gangland violence near a restaurant, and the Swedish kind of gangland mafia around the restaurant industry, because it's got a lot of cash. That's why they speculate that the car bomb was placed there. This time it was on the north side of town, in a part of town called Kista, which is where you have a lot of technology companies, telephone companies operating. So the bomb was placed this time at a building door, and the building door was blown apart, and apparently it was a very heavy explosive. And although it didn't take down the building like happened last summer in Linköping, so it's not clear, but I don't know if it was an assassination attempt or not, but it was clearly a way to get into the building. Perhaps it was a way to send a message. And we've had a press meeting this morning from the Swedish government to discuss the state of violence and what to do. So there was a lot of talk about the violence, and there was a lot of talk about bullying and so forth in schools, but really there was no real solution to how the police will resolve this issue of the gangland violence that we're experiencing. And we are leading the way in Europe in terms of violence associated with drug crime and violence in society. So those are not good records, but that's what we're looking at. And so the Swedish press also talks about the gangland violence in the US. And recently in California, there was a family of 6 that was killed. And at this point, it looks like a Mexican drug cartel had done the execution style murders in California. And they even killed a mother and her young baby. So I think Sweden is waking up to the fear that this could very soon be the next import from America to Sweden, this kind of drugland violence, which is merciless and spares no one. So it's very scary, but we'll see what happens and what the next steps will be. We do have a number of our Swedish government representatives down in the Davos World Economic Forum. We have 4 members from the government, and we have our Swedish Prince Daniel. He's down there at the event to talk about the policies and so forth. And one of the areas that they will be discussing is financial crime. You have the head of the FBI, Christopher Wray, and you have the head of Interpol also attending the conference. You have the head of the IMF, and they've talked about inflation this morning. And you have Christine Lagarde, the head of the ECB. She's discussing, the banking rates and so forth. And we've had a number of inflation figures coming in. So we'll see what comes out of this. However, the problems in Sweden right now are more the focus on society and what to do with that. One of the other things that the European Union is working on is we want to be competitive, and to do this, we need to have a very competitive energy market. Now, the competitiveness on the energy market is going to require that we build up our grid. And Sweden is one of the countries where we will be building. Poland is another country where they will be building. And it looks like Amsterdam, or not Amsterdam, but Holland, will be building a new plant as well. And the question is, at what speed will they be built at, and what will be the level that they're going to build at, so that you can have 50 hertz, megahertz at the grid level to supply for the power plant to be on at all times. And so in Sweden, that looks to be achieved. And we have 2 different companies competing on that level, because we have the Westinghouse contract, and those will be for the Ringhole 1 and 2. And then we have the Fortum contract, where they look to build, and that will probably be up north. And so the question really comes down to, why would Sweden, which is already building 1.5 times or providing 1.5 times the amount of electricity that we produce versus our consumption, why would we need to build so much? And that's because Europe is at a very low production level. Germany had been a major producer, as had France. But since Germany's been shutting down its nuclear power, and they've been replacing this with coal, and this is not in line with their ESG targets, it makes no sense. And it's really questionable why they would do this, especially when they're relying on the wind power, which they know is intermittent and sporadic at best, as well as solar. And in our winters, we really don't produce enough solar to be beneficial. So you have a real question of when will the ESG targets be met, and how will they produce and meet these ESG targets that they say are very important, and especially when they give target rates of 2045. And because they're clearly not doing what they're saying they're going to do. Because if you're saying you're going to achieve this carbon, and carbon is not the real problem is methane, which does something like 80 times more damage to the environment and heat retention than carbon would. And the production of carbon from farming versus methane from farming, these are both minimal ways to produce these products or byproducts into the atmosphere. But if you're actually looking at real production of methane and carbon, you would look at the fossil fuels. So things like the liquid natural gas, where in Russia you're producing a tremendous amount of methane when you're producing it. And Russia produces a lot dirtier methane. They have more leakage than, say, in the United States. And they had more leakage than you'd have in Holland in the North Sea. But Holland has still shut down the North Sea bed. So you really have to wonder what the objective target is of the EU. And so that brings us back to this question about subsidies. And so when you look at companies like Freyr, which is a battery company out of Norway and is going to be setting up in Georgia, they are going to set that up with Koch Industries or Koch Industries in Georgia. You wonder why they went to the US, and that's because the subsidies in the US from the Inflation Prevention Act provides a lot of green inducement or subsidies as a result of investment. So Europe needs to offer similar subsidies in order to make themselves attractive. Otherwise, companies like NorthVolt or companies like in England, which are the British Volt, are going to be going elsewhere. And England doesn't have the ability to produce enough electricity for their electric vehicles. And that's why the electric vehicle production in England is now switched over to China. And you see that coming out of Great Wall Motors in China for BMW electric battery. And when you have Volkswagen making a very aggressive target that they want to produce more of their electric vehicles in Europe, okay, and have all their production of EV in Europe, they really need to ramp up their electricity. And so this is going to take a lot of convincing for the German government, which allowed RWE to buy a town to produce coal, and they're producing lignite coal, which is some of the dirtiest coal you can produce, to produce the electricity. And if you look at a lot of the coal that's still being produced in the US, it's bitumen, which comes at a cleaner burn. And so you're producing a better product. But in Europe, where you have a lot of shut down nuclear power plants, you could restart them and regenerate the nuclear power and have an abundance of electricity, but they're not doing this. So you really have to question why and when they will start to do this. And especially when ESG is coming under attack, because in the United States, you have something like 14 states have moved away from BlackRock. They've prevented BlackRock from handling their pensions. And there are more companies doing that, or states doing this, because they want to see more money being made in the pension funds, meaning that these pension funds will not follow ESG, because ESG is going to eliminate the amount of money you can make. If you're buying oil companies, which are quote unquote not ESG, but are, you know, still doing gas and oil exploration, that's why they're not considered ESG, those are generally performing better because they're reinvesting into their industry to produce more in the next season, as opposed to, say, something like Exxon, which is green, but it's going to be producing less because they're doing less oil exploration. So that's a question of what's going to happen in Europe and how will they do this. And so the EU is proposing subsidies for European companies so that when you're producing in Europe, you can actually get a benefit from your production and have lower taxes. And one of the loopholes for this the United States may enter into is say, okay, fine, we'll accept those European as part of American made. So this will make things a little more competitive, and we'll see what happens with the grid, but we need a lot more grid investment. And which brings us to step 2 on the rare earth metals, which is for the batteries. Now, Sweden just announced that they had found more of these metals, and you still don't see anything announced yet on how they're going to be producing it or what companies will be producing it, if it'll continue to be LKAB, which is a government owned. And then there's nothing been announced in Finland, nothing been announced in Norway. And these regions are the same geologically where they found it. So you wonder, okay, when will they make their rare earth mineral announcements? And so it's a big what if, but also the amount of uranium in the Lapland, both in Finland and Sweden and up in Norway. There's plenty of uranium to fuel the electrical or the uranium rods if you were going to use uranium for your power plant. You can always go to a natrium solution, which would be a molten sodium, and these are different solutions which also eliminate the risk on meltdowns. So hopefully we see a lot more build outs. We've seen the announcements in Great Britain, we've seen the announcements in Poland, we've seen the announcements in Sweden, and hopefully we see some more in Finland, because Fortum said they will build in Finland as well. So and then we had the plant being announced in the Netherlands, and then we see plants under possibility in the Baltics, and then also farther Eastern Europe. We see some announcements there as well. So this will be needed, especially if they're going to meet their targets of 2045. But we'll see and look at the World Economic Forum to see what they're saying. Regarding what's going on in the Ukraine, the Interior Minister has died in a helicopter crash, and that was near Kyiv and Kiev. And so it's tragic. You see more loss of life, but also you have comments coming out from the Russian minister, Foreign Minister Lavrov, who is saying that the U.S. was playing a very dangerous game, and this is after Joe Biden has said that Turkey is going to get the F-16s, which was a contingent part for Turkey to allow Sweden into NATO. The NATO issue for Sweden, it seems to be less of what the terrorist, if they're extradited, the 130 individuals from Finland and Sweden to Erdogan in Turkey, and more about the F-16s. And so we'll see what happens there and see how the relationship between Turkey and Russia goes, and what happens in Syria, between Turkey and Syria. And then also the shipment of munitions, because now the United States is sending munitions from Israel to Ukraine to use against the Russians. And the reason why the Russians took over Soledar, and that's by the Wagner Group, is because they have these gypsum mines that were, they're very deep, and they're huge. So you can have all these munitions hidden underground and protected from bombing, and you'd be able to store them and have your troops down there and relatively safe. And what's scary is that this is being held by the Wagner Group, and these are some of the better trained groups or troops that they have. The other very well trained group would be the Chechens. And so the look at the Ukraine war is it's getting worse, because you also see Russian training troops in Belarus, and they're moving troops along the Belarus border between Ukraine and Belarus, which means that we could see a further escalation. Putin also came out with comments that he's going to strengthen and harden the borders around Finland, and he's going to increase his military component from something like 1.1 million to 1.5, and that's going to happen over a period of a couple of years. But that is a dangerous move when you're increasing the military by that much, and we're playing this proxy war between the west in Russia. Down here in the southern region, we're hearing the vegan jets flying overhead all week. So this is not good when you hear that many vegan. We have the strategic island of Gotland, and where we are, where I am, is in Kalmar, and that's also a very strategic point, especially if you want to do get over to the Baltics or evac from the Baltics, or you want to get down to Poland or get down to Germany. We're very close to these points by water and by air. So this is it's really, we're moving into a much more dangerous phase, and we'll see what's happening with the war, but it could escalate. And remember the border with Finland and Russia. If you look at the old Russia, which Putin is said to be trying to rebuild, Finland at that time was part of Russia. It had been taken over from Sweden, which had had it as a duchy before that, and then Finland fought and had its own independence. And there was a very bloody war in the on the frozen tundra, where the Finnish soldiers and some Swedes went over and fought with them against the Russians, taking them over. And then you have a free Finland. But it's a very dangerous game that we're at right now. So we'll see what happens. And then of course the stakes with NATO. You know, we're providing some of the weapon systems, both Swedish and some of the U.S. Patriot systems we'll be sending over to Ukraine. And the Ukrainians are training the troops in the Patriot systems, both in the United States and in Europe. And then some of the speculation there is that you would then have NATO troops also involved. Even after the troops have been trained, the Ukrainian troops have been trained, you might have some NATO troops involved. And this is exactly the story of how we got involved in Vietnam, and how you stepped up the engagement. And so it's a very dangerous game, and it's very scary. But we'll see what happens, and we'll also get to see what's happening with the European development of ESG, because everything they're saying about ESG and moving away from these fossil fuels, they're very often doing the opposite, especially with how you see that they're compensating for the power development now. You know, Germany did sign with Qatar a long-term agreement for the liquefied natural gas. But if you look at the lending rates and you look at the ability to make money in this LNG market, it's very easy to make money, especially because there are very few lending. So if you're an institution that has a lot of cash, you can lend out to these LNG companies and you can make 10, 20% in a very short period of time. You know, it's the amount that they're charging on the LNG itself would cover the lending rate over the first quarter of your involvement with the deal. And even if you had to be involved for 18 months, you're almost effectively net profit for the full 18 after 6 months. So depending on the level that you're going to get, but you can get lending rates over 10% in this market, which is incredible. So it's an interesting story what's going to happen with the ESG and how it's going to be pursued and how Europe is going to actually produce and pursue. And then when we look at the Swedish economy, we have seen the jobless rates going up. We'll see how we develop with our credit agencies and people going into bankruptcies and small businesses going into bankruptcies. That will be interesting to watch, and what the benefits will be. But we do see a increase in the amount of Swedish citizens. So we know we have a lot of people entering the job market, and we know we have a lot of people entering the Swedish market. So we'll see how this develops. And then the payment for this overcharge on the electricity prices has not been made, and it probably will not be made until March. Now, the initial idea was to have this by January and then by February, and now they're saying by March. But I think this is going to be played out more by what's happening with the inflation, because the last thing that the finance minister wants to do is trigger the Swedish Fed into raising rates, because she's increasing the amount of cash, free cash for people to buy products that they feel people don't need. So we've already paid our taxes, we've already paid our rates, but we don't get our money back until they feel that we're not going to spend it unwisely or in a way that would contribute to inflation. So this money coming back to the Swedish consumer may not happen until March. We've already seen the gas prices coming up. We've seen that the Swedish consumption of electricity has actually gone down. And that's largely due to the cost of the electricity. And that's in line with how they said they wanted the Swedish consumer to decrease the consumption. And that's in line with Europe, where they said they want the European consumer to decrease consumption. Now, that's also what happens when you decrease your consumption, you're going to decrease your economy. So they've put themselves in a difficult predicament. And to make it more fun, the Swedish politics are very soupy right now. So you have a lot of cat fighting, so to speak, where if you've ever watched cats when they kind of hiss at each other and claw at each other, you're seeing a very similar thing within the Swedish politics. So the center party, Annie Lööf, she's stepping away and she's stepping out. Some people are saying, oh, we're going to miss you, even though they were at bitter odds when they were working together in parliament. And she's come out with comments saying that she's going to miss her debates with the Sverigedemokraterna leader. And they were really kind of at each other's throats when they were debating against each other. And now you have the former Prime Minister, Magdalena Andersson. She's getting into kind of really very un-Swedish behavior, you might say, where in Parliament, she's laughing out loud when our finance minister, Ebba Busch, is speaking and talking about the energy crisis. And then Ebba Busch is calling out Magdalena Andersson and saying, maybe you can tell us after. So it's kind of like the school marm in class saying, you can tell us your joke later. So it's along this attitude or, kind of behavior that you're seeing people, our politicians acting in. And then you have this new center party head who it turns out also has Turkish citizenship. So he's going to give up his Turkish citizenship because there's a potential in their mind that he could become Swedish prime minister. This is doubtful. And this is the individual who 24 and 28 years ago used to headbutt people and was convicted for physical assault charges and getting into fights and headbutting people. So it's really kind of, we're in uncharted territories. But I think one of the things to really, keep your focus is because although we may not have the fundamentals right now to look at the market and say, okay, this is a company I want to buy based on the fundamentals, the bad news seems to have been squeezed out. We look at the Chinese economy. If it grew at 3%, and that's with the lockdowns, and then the Chinese are moving out of lockdowns, and the Chinese want to make money again, and they're getting very restless, and the Chinese economy opens up, and this is on the back of the declining trade trend. Well, then if the trade trend can start to go up, then obviously you'll start to see prices going up. Now remember, oil price is going to be one of the great ways to look at this, because we have now the 2 million barrels a day reduction from the OPEC plus. So as we see the reduction in oil, we'll see the pricing going up. If we don't see the pricing going up, that means you have a lagging economy. But if you see the pricing start to go up, well, that means the demand is improving. And then if the logistics have been worked out, which many people think it has, then you will see the oil price spiking and going up even faster. So the story goes, the warm weather has been a kind of a unfactored strong win for us here in Europe. We weren't able to predict it. Well, some people did predict it, but it wasn't a sure bet. And it's one of those unknown knowns. And then you now have a scenario where we could be in a very strong upswing for the market. So, sectors to look at, obviously, if you want to play individuals, you could look within the stock market, like for industrials, you could look at the industry A's and B shares, the industry Varden, or you could look at the investor shares. These would give you indications of which way the industrials are going to go. And then also looking at the Swedish kroner, which has been very, very weak, and watching there to look how that's going to trend would be another good indicator on how the economy is turning, especially as we have such a thin currency. And then when you look at the market where our names have come down to very low valuations, you may start to see acquisitions. And the acquisition charts always happen with the upswing in the economy because people buy the currency first. It's kind of like how if you look at what happened with the recent moves in the Bitcoin, and the tether trades and the United States purchase or possible purchase and what's been going on in the United States and the Bitcoin movement. And that's part of this whole reason why you've seen these heads of policing organizations at the World Economic Forum, because there's been a lot of hacking, and then there's been a lot of ransom payments, and those have been made through cryptocurrencies. That's part of the whole story. But we could be at an upturn in the market. I don't agree with the fundamentals, but you still could see a very strong upswing, and then you could, very easily see downturns. But and remember, there's a lot of different political fundamentals here that are ongoing that people can't predict. Like I just explained what's happening in Europe, or not Europe, but in Sweden, and we've seen the political turmoil, even Germany, where the defense minister had to be shifted out, and you'll see events changing in France, Italy, Spain, and if you look at what's going on in the United States, which is increasingly looking like a third world market, and really kind of a lot of political uncertainty, and a lot of people can't understand where the Republican Party actually negotiated for a stronger position within their own party to determine the outcome by holding out on their Speaker of the House, which the previous party, the Democrats, had not done with their Speaker. And so you get bills put through like the omnibus, which was 4,000 pages written by lobbyists and covering all kinds of bills, and for 1.3 trillion. And then taking the debt up to 32 trillion. You have a lot of political questioning going on now, because you may have Donald Trump out of the next running, and you may have Joe Biden out of the next running. And then you may have this open for, say, like a candidate like Michelle Obama with Gavin Newsom versus, say, Ron DeSantis and somebody like Tulsi Gabbard or Sarah Huckabee Sanders. These could be candidates that would run alongside of Ron DeSantis. There's a lot of uncertainties, but there's always an opportunity to make money in the market, and that can be going long or going short, and then taking a strategic allocation or a tactical allocation, or looking at the options to trade. And so hopefully this is helpful for you, and you like and subscribe, so you're getting our points of view, and you're successful in your trading and market endeavors. Thank you very much for your time, and have a great day. Bye.